Okay, we are now going to start talking about the polymers of the alkenes. Polymers, if we break down the word, poly means many. And so that should be a clue to you that this is a really long chain of many repeating parts. So these are large chains. They're found in nature and they're actually synthetic, meaning that they're made. For instance, cellulose in plants, the DNA in our body, proteins, are all natural, and those are considered polymers. Most people are actually more familiar with the synthetic version of things like polystyrene or nylon or Teflon, which is used for coating. They are made of monomers. Notice polymers, monomers. Mono means one. So this is one segment of the polymer. These are what are actually being repeated in the polymer. And the reactions of alkenes, which is the unsaturated double bonds that we were talking about throughout the chapter. In the previous chapter, or in the previous section, we talked about reactions of alkenes. And that, for instance, if we added hydrogen, the double bond was broken and two more bonds were typically made. It could be hydrogen if it's hydrogenation, H and OH if it's hydration, so on and so forth. Well, instead of bonding to something new, instead of bonding to a outside chemical, it's actually ended up bonding to another identical chemical. So a bond still breaks, but instead of being attached to above, it links across to the next one. And the next one bonds breaks, and it reaches across to the next monomer. And that's how you're getting a chain. So if you look at the one on the bottom, these are all single bonds now because they were originally double bonds. If we put a double bond here, that's what we had at the beginning. And then that bond broke, and a new bond is formed between them. That bond broke, and a new bond is formed. And that's why they say that this here is the repeating part. If we look at the name, ethylene is the original one. The name of it is polyethylene. So many of those ethylene parts. We are actually going to spend some time this section talking about the different polymers that can be made through this process. Polyethylene is the one we just talked about. So here's the carbon double bond. So two carbons bonded together, and then 4 hydrogens total. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your repeating part right there. Ethene or ethylene, which is the same thing. Polyethylene. Notice the second part of the word is the same. That's what makes it up. These are primarily used for plastic bottles, insulation, things along those lines. Polytetrafluoroethylene, really long name, that's why they ended up shortening it to Teflon. These are coatings for non-stick materials for cookware. Notice tetrafluoro, we have 4 fluorines here. Instead of having 4 hydrogens, now we have 4 fluorines. So if we're looking at this, that would be the repeating section right there. There was originally a double bond here and here. Those double bonds broke and a new bond was formed. Double bond broke, new bond was formed. Polypropylene, notice prop, that means 3 carbons. Propylene is just another way of saying it. Once again, prop is 3 carbons long. E, there's a double bond there. So here's the double bond originally. So here's one repeating part. Here's another repeating part. That bond broke and a new bond formed between them. These are used for things like clothing, artificial joints for medical purposes, carpeting, things like that. Polystyrene, you've no doubt seen, is actually called phenylethene. So let's take a look at that. Phenyl means there's a benzene ring. Ethene means two carbons that are double bonded. So that's going to be the repeating part. And here's your repeating part right here. There was once a double bond here, and here, and here. That broke and formed a bond between the two monomers. That double bond broke, formed a bond between the two monomers. That double bond broke, and so on and so forth. Now it's abbreviated styrene, and that's just a common abbreviation. The phenylethene is actually the more correct name. PVC, you've no doubt are familiar with if you've been to Menards and places like that. Used for plastic pipes, tubing, garbage bags, so on and so forth. It's actually a fairly strong plastic. So if we're looking at this one, vinyl chloride or chloroethene. Well, ethene, there's two carbons double bonded. And chloro, there's a chlorine coming off of it. Vinyl chloride is actually the more common name for it. So here's where the double bond would have been. And here's our repeating. That double bond was broken, and a new bond was formed between these two. And here's our repeating. Those are the monomers. Polydichloroethylene. Note dichloroethylene, ethene. So in ethene, which is two carbons, double bonded because of the E and E. Dichloro, which means there's two chlorines coming off the first carbon. So notice here, two chlorines coming off of a carbon, and there's another carbon bonded to it. There's another repeating one. And so on and so forth. That's used for saran wrap and things along those lines. So, if we're looking at the starting materials for these, polyethylene, if we take away poly, that means we're left over with ethylene. And that would be our repeating part. Polyvinyl chloride means that it's starting off with a monomer of vinyl chloride. However, that's not very specific. That's the common name. It actually looks like this. And that's actually 1,1-dichloroethene. And then polystyrene, once again, that's a common name. And the actual name is styrene or phenylethene. So it's styrene or phenylethene. So once again, we have a double bonded carbon, but now we have a phenyl coming off of it as well. All right, and here we go. Notice the common names are in parentheses, and these are the official names. Alright, so the monomer, polypropylene. Write out the portion of the propylene polymer using three monomers. So, polypropylene, that means propylene is the monomer. So, prop means that there's three carbons. two of which has a double bond between them. So that's going to be our monomer. That's going to be our repeating part. So CH. Okay, so there's one monomer there. We have to do it again. So there's one monomer. There's two monomers. Do it again. And there's three monomers. Notice CH3, HCH3. This is our breakdown. There's the polymers. Alright, and the final thing we're going to talk about is the recycling of plastics, because that is a very big issue right now. It's nice that we're able to make all of these synthetic products, but we also need to be able to do away with it when we're done with them. Well, if you take a second to look on a plastic container or something that you would ordinarily recycle, chances are you will see this triangle. That's the recycling code. Sometimes there's a number in it, sometimes there's letters, sometimes there's both. But they match up to these. So 2 is HDPE, high density polyethylene. And that just basically tells people when it's dropped off at the recycling plant how to deal with that chemical, so that way they're able to break it down easily and safely. So if we look at these, for instance, number 3 is PV. 3 is polyvinyl chloride. Five is PP, which is polypropylene. And 6 is PS, which is polystyrene. And that is all we're going to talk about with polymers.